Welcome to the Painterly podcast. I'm your host, Alex Foley. Today we're talking with Carrie Stanley, who is a visual artist who makes physical, visceral, and colorful paintings, works on paper, and more recently, performance. She studied with the Terps Banana Art School from 2020 to 2022, and previously at the Lorenzo de' Medici Art Institute, Florence, from 1991 to 1993. Her work is rooted in connectivity both in subject matter and materials. In 2012, a pivotal event changed her life when she lost her husband, the gallery director Michael Stanley, to suicide. Work over the past 3 years has focused on transmuting her complicated grief through her practice creating art, which is honest and raw. This is communicated through instinctive choices of materials, often bright colors, and automatic mark making. She was awarded the Arts Council Developing Your Creative Practice grant to start this work in 2022, and is now preparing a pitch for a project grant to develop it into a touring exhibition and supported mental health talks. She lives and works in Hove, which is why she has been able to join me today in my studio for the first podcast episode to be recorded in the studio. And we're talking about grief today. So how are you?
Mm-hmm. I'm good. Yeah, I'm good actually.
On this grey and rainy day.
I have a little, I do have SAD. So I've noticed that like my colour palette has been ramping up quite a lot recently.
Yeah.
As a kind of an antidote.
I can feel I have a little lamp and I can feel the urge to pull it out as...
Yeah, no, they're good. Yeah, I've been using fluorescent pigments as well recently. It really makes a difference.
Yeah, as you saw on my shelf, there's a very fluorescent painting right now. Maybe I'm feeling the draw as well.
Oh, that's true. Maybe you're like, instinctively choosing those colours.
Yeah. So why don't you tell listeners a little bit about your practice in depth and what it is you do?
Okay, so I suppose I'd say I'm a painter primarily. But I also say that I draw with paint because drawing is like at the heart of my practice. I sort of see drawing as like really instinctive, and it's like a language, really, language of communication. So I make lots of different types of work. Big physical paintings that I love. I like to make big work because it kind of meets you on your own like physical plane. So I always sort of say it's like having like a dance or a battle when you're working on something that's like life size in front of you. And there's something about that I really enjoy. I've got loads of sketchbooks. I've recently started experimenting with a bit of photography and performance. I'm not quite sure where that's going, but it was super fun to do. I mean, that's part of my grief project, which I'll talk to you about in a minute. But yeah, I mean, I just like paint for me is like a way of communication. It's like a language. The colours, like the mark making, actually just being in the zone in that headspace. So previously, I was a portraitist actually. For many years, I used to do portrait commissions for people, and I did enjoy it, but it got to a point where there was nothing of me in there. It was like I was just painting other people and there was no connection. And it kind of grew and grew and grew, this feeling that I needed to start making work which was more about myself. And that kind of crystallized during COVID, which is where I joined Kenya and started chatting to artists all over the world. Actually, that group was kind of pivotal in helping me be confident enough to break away a little bit and just start doing my own, exploring different pathways, I suppose. So I still call myself a figurative painter. I'd say figuration is at the heart of what I do, as well as drawing. But it can be very abstracted these days. So it's like the mark making itself is what pulls me. I've been working automatically, so like automatic processes, which basically means not having any kind of preparatory work at all, other than like an idea or a concept, and just going straight into the canvas and just seeing what happens in the moment. It's quite existential. It's fun. It's terrifying. It just feels, for me, it's like really honest and exciting. I still do love, going to like life drawing classes and stuff like that and working from observation, but there is something about working automatically that is feeding my soul, I guess. That sounds a bit pretentious, but
No, I was thinking about your work this morning, and I had like a little bit of an epiphany, and maybe this maybe this analysis is way off, and if so, please just tell me, and I'll
yikes, go on.
turn back on all of it. No, I was thinking about how of all the artists I know, I was thinking about the cow you did recently. You had the
my
print
cow.
of the drawing of the
Yeah.
cow, and you have like a magenta kind of like scribble over the cow, the figure of the cow, like it sort of bleeds into this, and it reminded me of viscera, like a part of the body, like an organ that had been taken out. And I was thinking about how actually lots of your work, of all the artists I know, your figures feel the most like they are part of you that has been taken out of you.
Oh, that's so interesting.
And it feels like that they're often sort of surrounded by these envelopes of paint or color or chroma, and it made me think of either like a placenta or like when you have something in you, it gets surrounded, the body surrounds it with tissue, and it made me think of that tissue that like is part of the body and yet like a separate thing that has been like removed from the body. And
that's so interesting. I mean, that's very true actually, because of the nature of what I do now. I mean, we can talk about it.
Yeah.
The subject is grief. So as Alex said, I lost my husband to suicide in 2012, and it's kind of, for a long time I didn't make any work. I couldn't make any work. And then when I started to allow myself to think about a creative future, let's say, I just had to go within my instinct and my gut feeling. So really, when you say, I always talk about my gut, so things come from the inside and then are released out, and that really is part of like making work about grief and about grief experiences, is that for me, like sort of tapping into those very physical feelings in your body can kind of somehow alchemically transmute out into something other, is incredible. And actually it's been really healing, really cathartic. It wasn't really intended to be like an art therapy for myself. It was more just like finding a language to describe everything that I was experiencing. So I think what you're saying is very true. And I do think about the body a lot, because the body stores a lot of trauma. And, it's a bit like when a baby has cranial osteopathy and they have like very tiny like spinal adjustments, which allows them to then, become peaceful. So trauma and the body is something that really interests me. I have recently I've discovered that I see colours differently, and I've been doing research about this because I didn't really know it was something that was happening, other than what people were telling me about the things they were seeing on my canvases, and I wasn't really seeing it myself. So apparently you can have some kind of synesthesia with post-traumatic stress disorder, where your pupils actually stay dilated. They don't shrink. So it's to do with like hyper vigilance, the fight or flight instinct, where you're constantly on edge and your pupils therefore are larger, waiting to sort of see the enemy, as it were. So I'm getting treatment for PTSD now. I'm having like EMDR therapy, which is helping, but I still have I still see the colours. I still see things in a really bright, like the world becomes super bright and almost like iridescent sometimes.
Sorry, you mentioned EMDR. What is that?
Okay, let me see if I can get this right. Eye movement. Oh my gosh. Eye movement is something like regeneration, detection and regeneration. I can always get that wrong. But it's basically like a therapy where, and it was first given to veterans who'd been in a war situation, where they found that if they followed like, it's usually a light source, which is kind of, I'm doing the actions, but you can't see. How to describe it? It's like a reprogramming. It's like a sort of reprogramming of the memory so that when you remember traumatic events, they have less of an impact. You remember them differently.
I've just looked it up. It's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
Yeah. Okay. I wasn't really very close there. It's really interesting. Really interesting therapy. But I forgot what the question was now. What was the question?
Oh, I just asked what that therapy is.
But it's interesting because I've been doing that kind of naturally within my work anyway. I've kind of been using certain tools and materials that are kind of making me remember the experiences in a different way. If you can use like incredibly beautiful colours and marks. And I think it's Paul Origo who talked about painting your demons, like, you know, facing your demons and just paint them out. You know, she painted all her like late husband's lovers in her paintings as little like imps and kind of like grotesque figures, and I just thought that was so cool.
Oh wow, I could never.
And we're gonna see it soon. So, and I love her, you know, she's a great inspiration as well. She's so like feisty and gutsy, and she just painted things that she absolutely had to paint. So she's a huge inspiration for me. So I have been, like, through my grief work, through my project, I have been painting out grief is not a linear process. So what happens is I tend to remember specific moments in time. And in those specific moments in time, there might be an image. So I'll start with that, and I will make a painting about it or a drawing about it. And then things will happen as the painting progresses, which is kind of part of the automatic process. And often I won't see anything until the end, and I'll stand back and see something. So it's quite magical, actually.
Yeah. It's your work really makes me think of the word like medium and what we actually mean by that, and like, you know, it's that intervening substance between us and the work we make, how it's made, how it gets to other people. And I feel like with your work, you really feel that it is like a substance, like a fluid that is like connecting us in a way. And like, sorry, I'm getting like really like theoretical now, but like, no, I love your paintings so much, and I feel like they do just feel like there's this like fluid, like wet interconnectivity between like that. It feels like we are going through. I'm sorry, I'm not explaining.
No,
myself
it's
well,
good.
But
I like the goo aspect.
there's just a fluidity to the mark making, to the, it's loose, it's beautiful.
It is very loose. It's kind of a world away from what I used to do, and I just feel like I've been on this huge journey where, you know, I was making, you know, portraits of people as commissions. I was very much a people pleaser with my early painting practice, and now I don't really care. No, I do, but it's like I'm making work for me and that I find exciting, and I'm a big kind of devotee of Rick Rubin and the creative act and everything he writes about in that book. And he writes about how it has to start with the self, how we're all unique, you know, we all have our own language, and how actually in that sense competition doesn't exist. We all have something amazing to give, and being honest and just like noticing things, you know, what you notice is kind of entirely responsive to you. Like, other people might not notice that, and you know, all these things kind of build together to give you your voice. So it's made me feel a bit more focused and a bit more confident about what I'm doing now. But it's difficult at the same time because I am dealing with a very difficult subject matter. So I don't have difficulty talking about it, but a lot of people don't really understand. So I suppose my dilemma is, how much information do people need to understand, or will people just come to it with their own understanding, and is that enough?
Yeah, because you're talking about something where your personal grief is complicated and because it is personal, people won't understand, and yet it is something that we will all experience. It is something that is coming for us, no matter what our life looks like. We will all have to grieve someone. We will all have to experience that feeling. And so there's a...
That's so true. And actually, when you sent me like the questions, because Alex sent me some questions, and one of them was about Joan Didion and her book, The Year of Magical Thinking, which
we can get to that if you
I
like to
love
skip
that
to
book.
ahead.
I love that book so much. Actually, I've been listening to the audio version this week because I had to sort of refresh myself. And it's Vanessa Redgrave reading it, and she's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
Have you listened to the audiobook?
I haven't, but I've seen clips of the stage play that she...
Oh,
she
you know,
did.
it's brilliant. But, you know, Joan Didion talks a lot about that, about, you
It
know,
will
well, this
happen
is
to you,
this is
I
going to
think
happen
is-
to you.
yeah.
You're, you know, I'm describing, you know, the syringes on the floor and the blood here, and this is going to happen to you. This is my experience, but we're all going to go through it. And I love her kind of very literal kind of just, you know, she talks about... in fact, I've got a huge admiration for her because, you know, it's taken me... I don't think I could have done what she wrote that the year after her husband died, actually,
Yeah.
and her daughter then died after that. I could not have done that. I needed to have a good few years to kind of get myself on an even plane to even be able to address it. So I've got huge admiration for her being able to, you know, talk about things in the way that she does, so literal, and the way that that book just jumps around, because she describes the way it's like her brain just jumping around after grief. There's no logical connection, you know, time scale. She jumps from thing to thing to thing, and that really actually accurately describes the grief brain.
Yeah, because she describes it as magical thinking. It's not rational. It's not ordered in the way that we know, and not. I don't think. I personally don't think any of us are rational. I think that is something we've made up, and we use to get through life. But she talks about how that breaks, and yet she also talks in their the clips of her with Vanessa Redgrave, where they talk about, and Vanessa Redgrave lost her daughter, and they talk about, you think you're going to become a crazy person, and you don't, or at least not in the way you think you are. It's you know.
And I find this sort of the concept of magical thinking really interesting. I mean, I didn't actually know of it as a thing. I knew of the terminology, but I had to sort of Google and look at it actually what it meant. And I think it's just something. I think it's a very natural human part of grieving. You know, that kind of imagining they're going to come back.
Yeah. The example she gives in the book is they're going to be... Her nephew says, we're going to have to get rid of his clothes, and she says, but what if he comes back, even though she knows?
Yeah, I mean, it was, for me, it was, well, incredibly difficult, but it was really weird things for me that, like, it was his car. His car was parked in the drive for a long time after he died, and I didn't want it to go because I thought he might need that. He might need the car. Like, no one can touch the car. And then they came and took it away, and that was so much harder than I thought it was going to be. And, you know, we kept a lot of his clothes. You know, in a lot of my work, my grief work, I've made drawings about his clothes, about the suit I had to lay out for the funeral, and his shoes and things like that. And with my friend Alec, who's a poet, we did some writing together, and I did a poem. I made a poem called Transactions. Not really a poem, really, more like prose, which was... Transactions is just the things that was given to me and the things that were taken away. And the things that were given to me were his shoes and his phone and his laptop. So I really like just these objects that become so potent, and then they're there and they're so potent and you don't know what to do with them. But I used to just... I think in the early... I was completely mad in the early days. I was literally... in the true sense of the word, and I used to talk to him all the time and say, right, you just come back here and talk to me. you don't get to leave like this. You do not get to leave like this. I was so angry, and anger's a huge part of grief. Anger's often something that people don't address and they don't kind of talk about. You know, female anger in particular is, you know, people don't really... It's just hasn't been really a thing, you know. It's so important. It's important to talk about anger. It's a very natural human reaction, and so I used to kind of shout at him in an empty house and say, "You fucking come back now." Sorry, I'm swearing, but you know,
It's
come
okay.
back and
Go for it.
you idiot. But of course, that's not logical at all. He had huge mental health problems. He had clinical depression. I'm not going to talk about actually what happened, but you know, it's that whole thing of when someone takes their own life, you know, especially someone who's got depression, and there is no logic to it. There is no reasoning. Those jigsaw pieces will never fit. Never, never, never. So I used to describe the early days like being stuck in a pinball machine, like constantly, like just like your emotions and everything, like life just like ricocheting around. I'm not in the headspace now. But yeah, the magical thinking is it's a really interesting concept, and I think it's also very creative, because I often think if I hadn't got my imagination, where would I be now? Because I was always like a kid who was always like doodling and hiding and just like completely hiding from the world, and so it's not really very different now. It's just that I'm in my studio, but I would always like make little environments, little worlds, or be doodling or something to escape. And so I think that's kind of been my saving thing, actually.
And I think the thing with Joan Didion, and the thing that's so powerful, is that she approaches grief through her art form, which is journalism, in a way nobody else could. And that's what makes it so powerful, is that she's investigating grief, because that is how she can understand the world.
And that's it. You're right. It's so brilliant. You know, all her statistical. She reads, just for listeners who haven't read the book. She reads all her stats, all the stats, doesn't she, from the medical boards, and you know, it's all kind of it's very factual. It's very like documentary, isn't it?
Yeah, it reads like a fact-finding mission into bereavement.
Yeah, it is brilliant. I think it's.
And for those of us who don't have that skill set, who aren't journalists, who have to sort of, for us artists who have to be emotive and go that way, it's a very different process, I think. I'm currently, my grandmother has dementia, and it's reached the point where she's healthy physically mostly, but she doesn't know who I am. She can't really speak anymore, and I have to think, how do I grieve her while she's still alive? And I feel like
really
I'm
hard.
pre-grieving, and I haven't worked out the artistic way of going about it. My work isn't really autobiographical. It's not.
No.
There's not a lot of me in it, I don't necessarily think.
Really? Would you say that?
Well, not in like I don't think it comes from me, but like I don't think it's not my story necessarily. It's not my narrative.
But you know, that's the same for a lot of artists, isn't it? I mean, and there's no right or wrong. So it's just it's your own thing, isn't it? So I think a lot of artists don't put themselves into their work. Yeah,
and so it's how do I process that grief with my gift of art when I don't normally.
So the way I kind of describe it, because I'm also an artist mentor, and I do mentor people who have been through trauma and grieving and all kinds of things. So the way I approach it is that for me, kind of, it's about connectivity. So rather than thinking about what am I going to paint, rather than thinking about an image, you draw in the things around you that you have a connection with that person. So it might be, you know, it might be her clothes, it might be a letter she wrote you, it might be a memory that you had, a colour. I tend to use the senses a lot within my own work, like all my senses actually. And I think kind of the memory linked with senses is really potent. So I think anyone wanting to make grief work, probably it's good for them to start with working with things that they have like an instinctive connection with that person. like for me, when I at the very start of my grief project, when I was just there, I'd got the DYCP grant, I'd bought all these materials, I was sitting in my studio, and I'd tacked up onto the wall this huge, like I bought a roll of white paper and I just tacked it to the wall, and it was about 3 meters by 2 meters, absolutely huge. I was just sitting there in front of it thinking, how am I going to start this? And I just thought of a colour initially, which is like pink. It's not just any pink, it's like the pink that I use, the pink that's on your your microphone right now. It's like a very potent, bright magenta pink that has a resonance with me. And I thought about it. I was thinking, why that pink? Why that pink? And there's a whole host of different things it could be connected to do with my late husband and my life with him. One of which is that we both loved geraniums because we both grew up with them. Our grandmothers both grew geraniums, bizarrely. We both grew up in greenhouses with these geranium, like bright pink flowers in the centre of it. And geraniums was one of the things that I used a lot in my grief drawings, kind of crushing them up and using the colour. And anyway, I started with the pink. And then when I had the colour, I thought, what is the first thing I want to make work about? And I was thinking about circularity and cycles and life cycles, the cycle of life. And I started to just make circular marks, and then those circular marks became tree rings. So my without going into too much detail, my husband died in a tree, so I started to make tree rings, and then these rings became, they sort of they multiplied, and I was making all different ones. And then I started thinking about stress lines in tree rings and how does a tree record trauma and how these rings would change. And so it was a very natural progression from the colour to the circularity to the rings to the tree to the memory of the place. So that's quite a dramatic example. I wouldn't expect everyone to do that. But before I knew it, I had this massive drawing in front of me that looked like nothing I'd ever seen. And it was terrifying and really cathartic at the same time.
I was going through, before we met, trying to think of famous examples of grief in art. And actually, when we think about art, I don't know that that's necessarily a subject that we immediately go to, even though there are wonderful examples. And actually, I sort of spoke about this in another episode, but Tracy Emin has recently done an exhibition comparing her work and specifically her paintings focused on the loss of her mother.
Yeah, they're beautiful.
They're beautiful, and I don't. She's not an artist I warm to naturally, and yet they still sit with me.
They resonate.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really interesting. There's a lot of artists do use grief within their work, and actually a lot of artists, since I've started making a project, have got in touch with me. So I feel like I have this community around me now. But so some artists I can talk about.
And there's is it Monk?
The
running theme of this podcast is can't pronounce anything.
Well, of course, Tracy Emin did the show with Monk.
And grief was central to both.
I didn't get to see, but my daughter went to see it, and she actually bought me the catalogue and the poster, which was pretty amazing. I'm gutted I didn't get to see that. But yeah, and then so historically Rembrandt, Giotto, Fra Angelico. But I suppose I'm drawn to more recent artists who use it. So since I've been making my project, I've discovered the work of Matthew, and I can't pronounce his name. Let's see if I can Matthew Krishanu, who is an Indian artist, and he actually had some works on show recently at the Whitechapel. And I chat to him online sometimes. He's absolutely incredible artist. His wife Ushi died a few years ago, and he's made these absolutely beautiful, very simple, elegiac paintings about her in the hospital and just portraits of her. But he also does beautiful paintings of his own childhood in India, and they just have a really, like you're saying, a resonance to them. They're absolutely gorgeous paintings. And he's very honest and open in how he talks about grieving. So locally here we have an incredible artisan. I wouldn't call him an artist. He's called Alan, and I don't know if you've heard of this, but he made a film called The Nettle Dress.
I haven't heard of it, no.
You have to go and see it. It's incredible. So he, how to describe this in a nutshell? He lost his wife to cancer a few years ago, and he was always using fabrics and yarns within his work. And he went into the forest and was started doing long walks with his dog, actually just before she died. And he came across a patch of nettles. And he hated nettles because he had an accident with them when he was a kid and got really badly stung. But he was like, no, this is the thing I want to try and work with. And he actually found that the nettles had fibres that he could weave with. So over the period of 7 years, this is slow art. This is complete transmutation through grooving. Over the period of 7 years, he picked nettle fibres, he spun them, and he wove them into fabric, and he made a dress.
Wow.
And it took him 7 years to complete, and then his daughter wore the dress. So this is like the complete encapsulation of his grooving process in these fibres. And it's just so beautiful. And he the whole project, one of his good friends is a filmmaker. I'm going to get his name wrong. I think it's called Dylan Howitt. And he filmed Alan, spinning, going into the forest, all the different processes of making this dress. And then they've released this film, which started out in just this community centre in New Haven, but now is global.
Wow.
All of a sudden. And it's all, it's definitely worth seeing because it's so beautiful.
That sounds incredible. I need to check it out.
You really need to check it, and then you will cry. You will cry.
The painting I thought of when I was doing my sort of pre-reading though, the one that I really thought of was Anguish by August Friedrich Schenk.
Oh, I don't know that one.
And it's
let's have a look.
It's a ewe, a sheep, standing over a dead baby sheep lamb. That's the word. A dead lamb, and there are crows surrounding them, ready to feast on the carrion. And the ewe is sort of baying into the air, and I just, there's something about the fact that it's not a human subject that I think somehow, even though it's an animal that we know their consciousness is not the same as ours, and yet we can still feel that anguish. The name of the painting. Oh my goodness, that's quite powerful. Alex just showed me this picture now. It's all the crows waiting. That's quite sort of. And you can feel the inevitability that the lamb will have to be left, that the lamb will be picked apart, that process will go on, and yet the ewe isn't ready. No. I've never seen that before. That's amazing, actually. Standing watch. And I like the Victorians. I like their drama. You like the romanticism. The romanticism, and that one really stuck out to me. So I think there is a lot of, there is a lot of art that has grief in it. Often it's not so obvious that you need to kind of find it. But certainly I find since I've been doing my project that I am drawn to work that has more of a meaning, more of a content. But it's a very personal thing, isn't it? It's there's also, let's have a look at my notes here. So my good friend Alec, who is a poet in Scotland, Alec Finlay, he was commissioned by my brain's gone now. He was commissioned to make a COVID memorial, and it's called I Remember, and it's actually very beautiful. I'm not sure if you're into sculpture or not, but he makes all kinds of things. He uses words. Words are his medium, but he also makes structures. So his COVID memorial is a walk through a park in Glasgow, and each person, he interviewed people who'd lost family and friends during COVID, and then they talked about the person, and they made
supports for trees based on the posture of that person or something that reminds them of that person. So they're literally, these people are supporting the trees, but they're in a very simple kind of sculptural form, made in wood, and then they just have the words "I remember" written on them. So you can go for a walk through. You're going to cry now, aren't you?
Yeah.
You can go for a walk through this park in Glasgow, and I think there's 120 supports that he made.
Wow.
So when Michael, my late husband, died, he made him 3 of these supports. So, which are still there, I hope. They're actually in Milton Keynes, of all places, because Mike was director of Milton Keynes for a few years, and they're in Campbell Park. But the place they're in is like a sort of a very private, like, copse of trees. And you go in, and he's made these 3 really beautiful supports, which you can go and just sit with, like in like a quiet space.
That's lovely.
I love that concept.
I was actually going to ask you about the role of art in private versus collective grief, because,
Yeah.
and I'm not going to ask you to get into geopolitics, but like as we're speaking, we are being live broadcast death on a scale that I don't think any of us are meant to process.
No.
And I've cried every day this month, I think. I've seen and watched things that I just think will touch me until I'm on my deathbed.
I have admiration for that. I can't actually look at any of the images.
I don't know if it's good for me. I've felt the need to bear witness and to see it.
That's so interesting.
And it's being done in the name of a religion I love with all my heart. And yet I don't know how to square the images of these babies.
No, I don't know. No.
And I don't know what art can be made from that. I don't know what healing can be brought into that.
I think it's incredibly difficult because we're actually living through it at the moment.
Yeah.
And, you know, I have huge admiration for you for actually being able to... I haven't... You know, my brother pulled me up on this the other day. He said that anyone wasn't marching was taking the side of genocide. And I said to him, I don't... I mean, we're not going to talk politics here, but...
Yeah.
You know, from the perspective of someone who has PTSD and who is at the what they call the processing stage of EMDR, and I don't mean this in any selfish way because it's really not, but it's kind of, I can't, because if I start to try and engage with that, everything will unravel.
Yeah.
And like, you know, I have my children, I have my husband now, and I have people who rely on me. So I think the way to do it is to sort of think about, it's more like the small ripple effect of what you can do. Because of course you've got these enormous things you just can't even conceive of, and it's almost impossible to comprehend what's happening. But, you know, even just like small kindnesses, maybe it sounds really naive and stupid, but like small kindnesses are huge to me. I always try and be kind and generous to people around me, and I think, I kind of hope that makes a difference and that will ripple out in some kind of way.
Yeah. I've wanted just so badly to like put it in art somehow, to just like put this feeling out there, and then I get questions about, is it my place? Is it like, who gets to do that work?
I think you need to do what's in your heart.
Yeah.
So don't think about, you need to make that work that's in your heart. You have to make that work, and then it's up to you if you put it out there or not, isn't it? It's a very different thing, like you say, the private versus the public. If you find that once you make that work that you feel strong enough to put it out, then do. But I think it's a balance. It's a really fine balance.
And it takes time, you know. We are in the throes of it. I think the COVID example is interesting because I don't think that we have societally grieved that. I don't think there are now years of our lives that have gone by without connection, without marking birthdays and holidays as families, and I don't think we've grieved that.
Oh no, not at all. I mean, it's so difficult to even talk about. I made a drawing as part of my grief project the other day, which is called Totem of Us, it's a drawing from my imagination, and it's myself and my children in the very early days when Mike died. And it's all about the dynamics of parent-child widowhood and how our children cling to us, but also we cling to them. Mm. And it's quite like kinetic. There's like an energy to that. It's kind of, you know, we may pull apart, but then we pull together. And it's kind of when I was making the drawing, I was thinking about family structure. And of course, you can't help but think about, you know, the families that are like absolutely blown apart and shattered in what's happening, and how often it's the mother's job to kind of be cohesive and pull everything together, and, you know, to be the strong one when you have children who are relying on you. So I was thinking about all of those things when I was making that drawing. So it wasn't just my own experience, it was the experience of, you know, a mother who may have lost any family member actually, and who has to hold everything together. And actually I made that a week ago. Gosh, only a week ago. I was crying buckets. I was crying because, like you say, it's really hard not to be affected by what's going on. So even though it's my own experience, it felt more universal.
It's really interesting you bring up who does that work, who does the work of grieving. And I'm going to ask you in a second about grieving as art, but let's talk about it as work for a moment, because when the song This Woman's Work by Kate Bush, I know it's about birth and sort of that aspect of the life cycle.
Oh my god, that makes me cry every time.
But I always think of it about grief and that emotional processing that women are expected to do because men can't or won't or aren't taught to often. That's not in a universal case. And I've been thinking about the work of grieving a lot these past few weeks because of the fact that there are now
It's okay.
There are entire family lines that are now gone.
Yeah.
And who does that work?
Who does that work? And yeah. But I think it's interesting that you pulled up that like it is, grief is so often a task that is put into the feminine sphere. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm not right. Maybe I'm not correct. I mean, I know Alan was the artist who made the nettle dress. You know, he has 5 children actually, and he talks about how they all became a part of his project, and how that helped them through their grieving. You know, helping him pull all the nettles and weave them, and, you know, just kind of being present in this work that he was doing. So, in fact, a lot of artists that I talk to who make grief work are men, interestingly. So I think, I don't know, I think, but you're right, kind of historically, it is, or has been seen as the mother's job to hold the family together. And certainly for me, that was something that, you know, I was a mother first, which is why it took me so many years to grieve, because I had to get them through those years. I had to get my kids through those years. And of course that doesn't stop, you know. I think they'll be processing it the rest of their life, but there comes a point where you can't be responsible for them. They have to go off and live their own lives, and you hope you've done enough. You hope you've done enough. You know, interestingly, with the grief project, I did talk to them all about it before I started, and I said, I'm going to be doing this. You know, it's a personal thing, but hopefully it'll be more universal and it'll help other people. And they were all really supportive. Yeah, go and do it, man. I didn't think they quite expected the widow's fire drawings, but we've gone with it. But no, they are amazing.
So yeah, and now I'll ask, like,
Sure.
In what ways is the grief process an art versus work? And not that those are separate, distinct categories, but...
So art versus work. I have to consult my notes here. When you asked me this, In what way is it art? I think it's just a different way of seeing the world. I think for me, it's about communication and just having another language I can talk through. So another language I can communicate through. And you always hope that people will be kind of pulled into your orbit. But of course, art's divisive. A lot of people will hate your stuff. Some people will really understand it. So I think for me, it was just having a really honest dialogue, actually, with who I am and what I make. But although my grief project, I always talk about it as being a part of my work. It's not my whole work, but then everything starts from that place. So recently I've been making a whole load of paintings based on some old celluloid negatives that I found that my late husband took. He was a photographer. He was an amazing photographer, actually. We always had dark rooms in our houses. So it's really strong, that memory, the smell of the developer and going down into the cellar. And he was an amazing photographer. Anyway, I found all these negatives at Christmas, actually, that maybe I knew we had them, but I hadn't seen for a long time. I don't know. And they were the inspiration for a whole new load of work that I've done, where I literally just look at the negative. So I don't develop it. I look at the negative, and often they're reverse, which means the colours, the reverse, what they are in the real world. And there was something about that really spoke to me about different realities, different worlds, and about how actually I could make this into something of my own. So I started to see the painting process as being the photographic developer. So the painting process became, that tiny negative became the painting. But while I was making the painting, it was sort of becoming something other. And I sort of like to think of that as being rooted in the here and now. So it's kind of forward looking, and it's now, it's very present. So although it's kind of based on the negative, it's very much kind of in the future as well. So I really like that sort of thought about, transversing time. And so it is grief work, but it's also not.
I think about I have an Iraqi friend who is a doctor, and I remember him telling me once years ago about when he was doing his rotations as an F1. He obviously had a lot of experience with having to inform people that their loved ones had passed, and he talked about cultural differences and how people responded to that news. And he talked about people from his own culture, Arab cultures, have to sort of paraphrase, he said something along the lines of performative, over-the-top response to grief, that lots of loud crying, and it was such a stark contrast for him with his British patients, where there was a resigned kind of maybe sobbing to themselves quietly. But
that's so interesting, isn't it? I always think of that word keening, sort of the notion of keening and the actual visual image of someone keening. And I sort of think how other cultures are actually so much better at grieving than we are.
But part of it's because they have traditions where the grief is, I don't want to say performance in like that it's not real, but that it has a template for how you express yourself publicly that is cathartic and allows for that expression in a way that I don't feel we have.
No, we definitely don't have that. I was listening to I listened to this podcast called the Blind Boy Podcast. I don't know if you know that.
I don't know it now.
It's absolutely brilliant. And I can't remember the name of the guy, but it's Irish. He's Irish, and he talks about Irish kind of grieving and post-death rituals, and about traditionally how they'd be taken down to the cellar of a pub that soon after the person had died, and that everyone would actually have a drink around the body and actually offer a little bit of drink to the dead body, and sometimes put it on their mouth and rub it into them, and like the whole ritual around that, and how and of course I think that's probably based in Catholicism, I'm not sure, but they would sit with the body for a long time.
That's Jewish.
It's Jewish, is it?
Yeah, we're supposed to sit watch over the body. It's not supposed to be left alone. It's supposed to go into the ground very quickly.
That's Shiva, right?
So Shiva is slightly different. That's where
Shiva.
you sit with. That's where you sit with the family.
Okay.
In their house for 7 days, but someone is tasked with standing watch over the body while it is being ready to be interred.
Okay.
But I mean, obviously that's then gone through. It's Christian, and
there's so many different, and I find it absolutely fascinating, and I just think, and I wish our culture was more was more nurturing than it is. I mean, I've made work about this because I didn't see Mike's body after he died. It was like something in me knew that if I did, I wouldn't be able to look after my kids. I think I would have just lost all. I would just dissolved. So I think that I made that decision. And actually it was really interesting because I don't know if you watch Sex Education. Do you watch that?
I watched the first few series.
Okay, you have to watch the latest series.
Okay.
It's amazing. They do it so well. This should go into university like these. They did the whole. There's a few episodes based around death, and one of the characters' mother's dying, and the way they describe it and the way they film it is absolutely spot on, brilliant. Like the details are fantastic. So, the character in particular, I don't know too much of a spoiler alert, but she loses her mother. I think she overdoses, and she has a really complicated relationship with her mother, and she's sitting in the hospital and her mother's there and she cannot go and see the body. And so, but she sits there, but she can't leave also. She's just in the waiting room and she's doing a crossword, and she is fixated on finishing this crossword. So she will not leave the hospital and she's finished this crossword. And that is just it's such a strong, potent, tragic image, but it's so spot on. It really is, because it's kind of how and it's not that dissimilar to magical thinking in the sense that seeking something kind of dissociative to fixate on because you can't deal with the reality.
It's like being in a current. You're just grabbing whatever still thing you can find.
Yeah, they it's absolutely brilliant the way they do the whole kind of the death and the funeral and everything. I won't go into too much detail, but it's really good, and it was great. I was so pleased to see that because I haven't seen that portrayed before on TV like that.
I've been thinking a lot about. I'm doing a big piece for work on ritual.
Ah, okay.
And rethinking ritual and thinking about how to include LGBT plus people in Jewish ritual.
Wow.
And I won't talk about it too much because it's work, and I try to keep them separate. But
sure.
One thing that has cropped up is there's an idea of washing the body. And there are, in Judaism, death is very... it's contaminating.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to be around dead bodies. It's someone's specific job, and they're considered impure and impure, and it's a whole thing. And so there are secret societies that are supposed to wash your body.
Goodness.
After you're gone, and so one thing that I've been thinking about is sort of what happens if that body is not in keeping with our very gendered society, and what does that look like? What is the gendered makeup of the people who touch that body? How do we ask people before they've passed who they want touching their body after they go?
Oh my goodness, it's gosh, that's like
Yeah, and who do I want to touch my body?
It's, oh my gosh, it's things like that that sort of completely blindside me. I don't know. It's like he always carried a donor card with him. He was big on, he used to give blood. He wanted to donate his organs, and they wouldn't. You can't do that. It's suicide. No.
Really?
No. They won't let you do any of that.
Why?
I think there's a lot of medical reasons really to do with blood to the brain and things like that,
Right.
and they don't know what time the organs died and things like that. So I think it's very Joan Didion. It's very literal. But I remember being like really gutted by that because he really wanted to do that, and I was really pissed off. Amongst my manic, weird grief, I was really, weird things stand out. Like you can be completely illogical and like just in another headspace, and then something will just touch you, and that was one of them. And I got really angry about it. I think I actually called someone up and said, no, those organs have to be donated. Just, I don't know. I can't remember. There's a lot I can't remember.
Yeah.
But no, it's so interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. It terrifies me. I'm so scared of death, and
Really? Don't be scared.
I'm scared of being put in the ground, yeah, wrestling with my faith on that one, and yeah, yeah.
It's hard not to think about. I think this podcast is probably very timely.
Yeah.
Like you say, with everything going on, like we're surrounded by death, we're surrounded by horror, we're surrounded by trauma, and it's really hard not to think about mortality at a time like that. It's really hard. I mean, I kind of seek out things that are completely ridiculous. I watch like ridiculous dog videos for hours. I don't sleep at the moment at all, really, and I don't know why that is. Maybe it's to do with what's happening in the world or other stuff. So I just find myself like trawling, stupid dog videos on the internet. Or like I'll delve really deeply into the world of Moomin Trail or something. Just something that is like completely, will just take me out of my head.
It's probably healthier than what I do, but
well, I'm sure I do the unhealthy stuff too, but I'm a bit crap with alcohol and stuff. But if I'm in bed and I can't get up and make work, I can't draw, I'll wake the whole house up.
Right.
I'll do something else.
So you just have to.
Ideally, I would draw. Maybe I will.
Yeah, bring something easel and pencil to bed.
That would be good. Yeah, doodle mentality.
I've been having. I don't normally dream very much, or rarely, and then I can remember them, and I've been having the most awful nightmares. So I haven't been sleeping either. But yeah, death is creeping into my work. I mean, I've got a skull over there, lots of skulls. Memento Mori.
Yeah.
Halloween as well, I guess. But I think I'll ask you this. Do you think you talked about the reception to your art? Do you think dealing with grief has put people off your art? I recently did the Brunswick Festival, and I was selling my work there, and there were quite a few people who would walk up to my art, and particularly the skull and the dead fish that I do, and grimace and just make a face and sort of
really
react in disgust and walk away. And I think, particularly amongst the general public, there's an idea that art is supposed to be beautiful and sort of edifying positively, and I think have you what has the reception to your work been in terms of?
Well, that's a difficult one because interestingly recently I showed a work in Brixton as an exhibition called Home, which was which I didn't get to go to because I would have actually loved to have hung around and see what people said, because the piece that I submitted was a drawing that I did about I was actually on a course called Watermarks, which was amazing. We what water felt like inside our body.
Wow.
Conceptual. So I did this huge drawing of myself, and all the water inside my body was liquid. It was, it was blood. It was kind of breast milk. It was uterine fluid. It was, all these things. Very kind of visceral drawing. And I was really chuffed to be selected for this show because I haven't actually shown it before. But I did get some people did message me on Instagram and say, well, we loved your drawing, or it was, we loved your drawing, we wouldn't have bought it. Which is fine. So answering that question, I always feel like I'm going back to Rick Rubin again because he is my god. But if you're making something that is is very true to you, and it is you, it's a part of you, and it's it's just what you do, then that's the best you can do. And if people are drawn to that, then they are. If they're not, they're not. So I don't really worry too much about that. My mum always says, oh, I like your flowers.
My mum says the exact same thing.
It's a generational thing.
Yeah.
But the other stuff is very strange, Carrie. Which makes me want to make more strange work. But anyway.
My dad's always, well, why have you done that?
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know. It just came out.
I think that's a whole other conversation about people's perceptions to your work. I think the most important thing is to be true to yourself and not worry too much about what, because the right people will come to you. The people who engage with your work will engage with your work. But the most important thing is to make the work and to make it as honestly and as the best you can. And then those people will come to you in an ideal world. And don't be put off by the people who don't engage with it, is what I'd say. Actually, I made 2 Widows Fire drawings, and one of them sold straight away, which was amazing to a collector. And that was really that just felt really good, because I could see that she felt that it was important, there was something valid there, and she loved it. And she said it's one of the most terrifying things I've ever seen, but I want to buy it. It's like, great.
Yeah. So I guess my last question to you is, for other artists out there who are either currently going through a bereavement, or maybe they have a while in the past and they're still processing their grief, what is your roadmap for how to begin to incorporate that in your art? Because you've already mentioned that it took you a long time.
Yeah, I think it's kind of what I said before about finding things that you connect to. So finding, if you make the choice to, and I think it is a choice, if you make the choice to try and investigate grief within your work, then you need to be prepared for the unexpected. So I think being as open-minded as possible, being as experimentational as possible, because I think being open to grief is I think of it as an energy. It's a living energy. It changes, but it's always there. And so I think it kind of it comes in and plays its part in different ways. But I think the more you can get rid of barriers, so expectation, other people's perceptions, is going to put you in a really good place. So making the work for you is a really good place, in either in a sketchbook or wherever that starts, whatever it might be, and then building it from there. So it really is about thinking about it in kind of like a diaristic, is diaristic a word? In like a diary format, I suppose. And if, for me, I felt it building up and up and up in me. I knew that if I didn't do something, I was going to get ill or something. I had to get it out. So I think just being brave and getting those marks out, however they may be, it might be text, it might be marks, it might be a mixture of both, not limiting yourself on materials or formats or anything like that, because you never know what will happen. But it really is about doing it for you, and then if you're feeling brave enough to share, then to share. Yeah.
Wow, thank you so much for coming by the podcast.
You're very welcome. It's been lovely talking to you.
It's a heavy subject, but I really appreciate you sharing with us.
It's heavy. For the benefit of the podcast, is Alex and I have had 2 Negronis. While we've been making this podcast.
Yeah, I needed
not each, one each.
One each. That was the clinking of glass that you heard.
But no, I feel like, yeah. I mean, hopefully this will help people.
I think it will.
Definitely.
And where can people find you if they want to see your work or engage with your mentoring?
I have 2 Instagrams. So I have... I often wonder if I should combine them, but I'm keeping them separate for now. So it's... in my Instagram is Carrie Stanley Artist, and the grief account is called Visual Grief Diary with 2 underscores between the words.
Okay.
So that's where you can find me. Don't look at my website; it's terrible. I'm redoing it. It's bad. Don't look at the website. And I'm also I'm also a Substack newbie. So my posts on Substack are getting better, I hope. But no, Substack's a really good way to communicate, because it's kind of pictures and words, and you can kind of curate it a bit. So I'm also on Substack, and I think that's just my name. I think that's just Carrie Stanley. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to support the Painterly podcast, please consider subscribing on whatever platform you listen to us on, or signing up for our Patreon for a member account. We also have a crowdfunder on GoFundMe so that I can get some better podcasting equipment and hopefully sound slightly better. Thank you for listening. See you next time.